particular hour and a half tonight is a survey rather than an interview. I mean, last time we took feedback, how many people were here last time took feedback? Oh, wow, that's cool. That was real in-depth. This one is a little different. This is a very big topic, and I'm going to touch briefly on about 10 of the 15 bases of this topic, and invite you to pick a place where you're interested in strengthening the classroom climate amongst your students. That's the topic. What's so interesting about this is that it tends to be associated with the soft part of teaching skills, as opposed to getting the kids to know the objectives. Feedback, which is hard cognitive science. And yet the research is as strong around classroom climate as it is around anything else in the repertoire of teaching skills. That is to say, when the climate amongst the kids is strong, they do better academically. And I think that you must already believe that, otherwise you wouldn't come to that. You knew that that was the topic. Now, you should each have a sheet that looks like that in front of you. Everybody have one? This is the map. There are 3 strands, parallel but somewhat different, that are part of the definition of a strong classroom climate. One of them is community. That is to say, the kids feel like in your class, even if you teach one section of American history and they go to other classes in about time, when they're in your class, or your second grade, or your middle school social studies class, that's a community of learning. That means you know the other kids. And it also means, eventually, when this part is really developed, you feel like you have a stake in their success as well as your success. So this chart is developed, this chart is a series of developmental continua. At the top is the simplest, lowest level thing, and as you go down, you get more and more complicated and more deep. And I first really got this way of thinking about classroom climate from Gene Stafford, who was a high school English teacher. The best book about community building in a class was written by a high school teacher who had 5 periods and 5 different kids for 5 different sections, rather than an elementary teacher that has them all day long. And that was in the 1970s when I read that, and it kind of inspired me, because if the guru of the field at the time was a high school teacher, it must mean that you don't need to have them all day long. Of course, if you do have them all day long, you really got a shot at this. So that's the first strand, community. The second strand has to do with confidence and risk-taking. This is building within kids the belief that effort is the main thing that determines how they do, rather than innate ability. And it means disabusing them of some beliefs that get in the way of learning. Like, for example, mistakes are a sign of weakness, as opposed to mistakes are normal, we all make mistakes, and they're an opportunity for learning. 2 weeks ago, I was in the class of a man named Tony, who is a social studies teacher in Evanston, Illinois, and in service of that notion, Tony has a big strip across the top of his board that I mentioned. In an elementary class, it might be the alphabet, or it might be the number line, or something like that. He has words on his in high school. Here's what the words are: wrong, 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 right, wrong, right, wrong, right, right, wrong, right, 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 right. And there's an embedded message in that. Share with the people at your table what you think it might be. This is a sentence kids could say to themselves when they understood what it's getting at. Somebody pitch in to the people at your table what you think it might be.
Once you get it. Wasn't quite right.
I heard some good ones here. I'll just share what his is. His is, you haven't made enough mistakes yet to get it right at a real head deep level. In other other words, errors are the way to learn when you learn from them, and that's the climate we're going to build in this class. So these are levels of depth in getting deeper and deeper into that, and at the bottom is the toughest one of all to get kids to internalize, and that is everybody in here can achieve, not just the fastest and the smartest. By the way, smart is the word we're going to use in here, because what that does is it confirms the fixed ability view as opposed to the incremental ability view. Incremental means I can grow my ability to get better at something. So, this computer, are you going to come back? This computer belongs to Eliza. And it gets nervous when it realizes that I'm not Eliza. And it shuts down, requiring me to put in what she gave me, thank God, her password. Now, so that's the second strand. First strand, we build a community where kids support one another. Second strand, we disabuse kids of these life-limiting beliefs, and we build these life-liberating beliefs. The third strand of working climate is influence and control. It matters more to some kids than others, but what it has to do with is that I have a voice in some way, even if a small way as a kid, in the way things go here. That matters more to some kids than others. But for the kids for whom it matters, which is about 25% of any random population, they don't feel they have a voice. They start off resisting the environment. Now, there are certain institutions in society that systematically take away our capacity to have voice and influence and control. One of them is the Army. You don't question, you follow orders. Things happen and you go along. And young men who have problems with having no voice in how things go start to act out and wind up in the rehabilitation company in basic training. I was in the Army, as most young men were at the time when I was growing up, and there's some very high-spirited and able young people just wound up in the retraining company. A second institution that tends to deny voice and influence is a hospital. Some of you may have recognized this. They don't ask your permission, or even politely say, excuse me, at 3 o'clock in the morning when they want to come in and take a blood sample. They just do it, right? It can feel like a very disempowering place to be. And a third place where that can be part of the environment is school. I think less so in the modern era, but certainly when I went to school, it was total silence, you know, walking in lines everywhere you went. And, well, I got in trouble, as some of you perhaps did. I went to a parochial school in those days. So, the point here is, it isn't just to accommodate that learning style, it's that we want students to take responsibility and ownership of their learning. So this strand starts out making people feel like they are seen and heard, and it winds up demanding they be responsible for their learning. So you can see this is more than a topic for an hour and a half. But I do want to, there is a knowledge base about every one of these stages. It's all been created by people in our profession. We should feel proud of that. Most of us, unless it was a personal interest of yours, haven't gotten deeply into this, but it's there for us to learn. And what this year is the kickoff of in Eugene is creating resources and common foci on things that are important for student learning. And not having it be the fad of the week or the fad of the year. Classroom climate will never go away. We know it's important always, and it's something that we want to make available for everybody in the district to learn more about, however good you already are at it. So, I'm going to take a few of these things and start nibbling away at it. And my hope is that by the end of our hour and a half, there's one area somewhere in this diagram that you say, that's the one where I want to do something there. I want to do something there next week or next month. And I want to develop that with my kids so I can demonstrate evidence of some sort that there's more of it than there used to be. Because it's not just niceness, it's actually directly correlated with student learning. Does it make sense why it should? if I feel a member of a supportive community and that it's safe to make mistakes here and I have some voice in what goes on, I mean, by the way, how about you and me as teachers in a school using the same metrics to assess our motivation and our learning about our own practice? Same thing, no different. Any human organization where those things are created, the organization does better. Just a little parallel in this huge library of books on leadership that the corporate world has put out. The essential book of recent years was called Good to Great by Jim Collins. What Collins found out is that the most successful leaders are not the charismatic big personality fills the room with their presence when they come in kind of person. Although they can be, but by and large, those personalities are not the leaders of the companies that sustain improvement and progress over a period of time. They're the people who create these conditions. Now, they have clear expectations and they have vision too, but they create a community where the workers on the line and the managers of the factory and the sales force feel like they need each other and they depend on each other. And I'm not going to get creamed and killed if I make a mistake, but I'm going to be held accountable for it and invited to learn from it in some way. Okay, let us start with this one. It is possible in high school to go through a whole year in a class of a certain section and not even know the names of the other kids in the class. The starting point of this community building is simply knowing something about the other people. So let me give you 2 minutes at your table to do this. I want you to introduce yourself, saying both your name, what you do in your job, and the third thing is, when you get home after a tough day or a tough week and you want to kick back and relax, what's the best thing that works for you? Start with the person who has the shortest hair at your table and go clockwise. Now that only took 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes. If I were your principal, I would do something like this at every staff meeting. And I would mix up people at the tables who don't normally work with one another, and especially, not that first meeting, but after a little while, people who are at odds with one another. Or come from departments that are competing for common resources. Because when you have to negotiate with people or solve problems, especially with people with whom you have somewhat conflictual histories or past relationships, when you know something about a person, it is just simply more difficult to fight with them. Not impossible by any means, but it certainly changes the tone. So, just moving down one level, you have a curriculum called the Caring Classroom, and you have a number of activities in this district which work on that, where you explicitly put kids in contact with one another in structured situations so that they learn to acknowledge or to listen, or in some way to be in contact with other people. And I have witnessed that in some of your classrooms already. Here is something like that happening in an elementary school classroom. This one happens to be in Massachusetts. And it is called Spotlight. The Spotlight structure means that you pick a particular student, or they pick themselves, or one of the students nominates them, and the spotlight is put on that particular child for a compliment of some sort. Now what's interesting about this particular clip, which I didn't realize until after I had talked to Stephanie, who's the teacher, is that the kid who is picked here is a kid who entered the year on a behavior plan. Because the kid was getting into trouble and fighting with others all the time. Now, this is February of that year, and he winds up the kid being picked. There were 3 kids in this class who were on behavior plans for, behavior disorder or borderline behavior. I was there the whole day and I couldn't tell who they were. It wasn't magic, it's because there was a systematic attention to this community building. So I'll let you watch a few minutes of this activity.
Applaud and congratulate Mary and John with sticking with April Aliens. That was your suggestion, Mary, and that's what you liked.
Can you hear that?
I liked it also, and I appreciate the fact that you stuck with it. Okay, you carried through on it. Okay. Great. Compliment. I mean, spotlight, excuse me. We haven't been in spotlight for ages. Yeah, may I say hands, please? Ever. All year. All year. And your hands in the air tells me that you are making the decision about whether or not you've been in the spotlight. And if you want to be in it, that's true. If you want to be in it, you want to be. Okay, we're going to start with Tim. Would you like me to start or do you want to start? You are something to start. Oh, Tim, so much. I'm going to give you two compliments. I'm going to put them together into one. I'm going to give you a social compliment and a compliment also about school work. Okay? I'll start with one that's easier, schoolwork. Tim, you have done an outstanding job since September of working in your writing to really, really stretch your ideas, to develop your ideas, to pick exciting vocabulary. You are showing me now that you like writing, and wow, I couldn't have said that back in September. And that is probably the best compliment I can give you because you are a budding author. And that's a wonderful compliment. Also, I want to thank you too. I want to compliment you on the fact that you've done a real good job, Tim. I know you have a great sense of humor. You have a wonderful sense of humor, and everybody knows Tim has a great sense of humor. But you know what, Tim? You've done a great job in class time being very, very appropriate about your sense of humor. Do you know what I mean by being appropriate about what do you mean? Okay, but it's all right to laugh and have fun? Oh, sure. I mean, I want you to laugh and have fun. But, yeah, you know when you need to be serious, you're being serious. And I really thank you for that because I've seen so much growth in you since September, and I can't wait to get your mother and father in here for the conference. Yeah? And specifically, what are you talking about out here? He probably doesn't even realize he's doing. Thank you. Liz. What did he do instead, Liz? You just dealt with it, right? I mean, deal with it. You have two girls. It's not like it's about 15
Yeah,
minutes.
that was about it. He was the only boy in the group. He didn't moan and groan about it, he just got to it.
Per day, right? Right. Chris? So it's not turn it on. He knows what to do with his spare time.
Can you turn it
Very
on?
nice, Chris. And John.
Wish I could.
Oh.
Max.
Yeah,
don't even realize that you do it, and here's Mike saying, yeah, you do it. And you're saying, oh, when did I do it? But other kids are realizing that you do it.
That's enough to get it. That's enough to get a flavor of it. Now, those of you who do things like this know that you can't start off doing a circle like this with this direction unless you model it, scaffold it, and have kids practice various forms of it. And the safest, best kids at it are the first ones to do it, so everybody gets to see. And you couldn't start with, nobody would have picked Tim in September, for sure. But here it is, you know, he's a transformed kid because that community. Now, this is just one tiny little bit of it. This is the part that has to do with acknowledging. And you wouldn't do it that way in high school. You got to invent other ways to make class do, because you haven't got time in a 42-minute period. She, by the way, only does that kind of circle meeting once a week. But in secondary school, you got to come up with other quicker ways to highlight behaviors that are part of contributing to a community. So I know a middle school teacher who does one with a rhythm. It starts off with 2 stamps and a clap. Stamp, stamp, clap. Do it with it. Stamp, stamp, kind of rhythm. Now, watch. Well, when somebody does something that's part of what they're looking for in a good community builder, like helping a peer, she'll take a pause or in transition time say, by the way, shout out for Judy for helping Tom, a 1 and a 2 and a... Everybody does that and it's over. So you invent little devices like that to acknowledge that's what that is. Okay. Now, let me go back to our chart. What I would like you to do, however, is to number off around the table. So everybody has a number. Somebody's a number 1, somebody's a number 2, somebody's 3, somebody's 4, somebody's 5. Just go around. Everybody has a number. Okay. Number 3, I have a job for you if you don't mind. Could you make sure that everybody's voice, that everybody is there, everybody speaks to the following prompt. Here's the prompt. It's a table discussion, and it's short, but I'm going to call on somebody from your group to represent your group. I might be calling on anybody, so I want you to come to a consensus about your agreement so that the person I call on will accurately and with credit reflect the discussion you had at your table. Okay, here are the 3 strands of classroom climate. Community, risk-taking, and influence. What do you think the relationship is of those 3 to one another? That is, are they separate, or is there some way in which they are interactive? The prompt is, what is the relationship of those 3 strands to one another? Kind of a complex question, but I don't know who person number 5 is at your table, but in a minute I'm going to call on person number 5 from several tables. So would you all ask that person to summarize what you've said so far and see if you all agree? Kind of prep them to be the person who represents your table. 2 minutes to do that. Go. These are very effective cooperative groups I'm seeing here. as I guess one would expect of the people who came to the classroom climate. Now, the structure that I just did, some of you may recognize. It's called Numbered Heads Together. And it comes from the 1970s, when, and a few of us were around then, cooperative learning was big. You couldn't go through a year in the 70s without having somebody at least offer a workshop to your school in cooperative learning. And the names associated were David and Roger Johnson, Robert Slater, Elliot Aronson, who invented the jigsaw. And what is so, in my mind, powerful and also sad is that the research was very, very strong about the effectiveness of well-done cooperative learning in increasing student learning. In John Hattie's book, and 2 other books over the decades that summarize meta-analyses of the most powerful strategies for influencing student learning, cooperative learning is up there in the top 10 or 12. Always for effect sizes, those things. Cooperative learning doesn't mean group work. They can be totally disconnected. Cooperative learning is a professionally defined term with specific attributes. You got to have face-to-face conversation with students. You have to have heterogeneous groups. You have to have individual accountability. Every individual student will be held responsible for knowing the material, and I will be assessing them individually, even if there's a group project involved. There is explicit teaching of social skills. Like, while you're working in your groups, I'll be walking around with my palette, which is connected to the projector, and I'll be writing down things people say in the groups that are good groupy things to say. Like, does everybody understand that? Did that make sense to you? Did you hear what she said? One might not be true. Things that people say, I'm writing them down and you're getting to see them. And then I stop. And I say, by the way, boys and girls, or ladies and gentlemen, notice the things I'm highlighting now in yellow. People are always saying, you get it, and then somebody says, yes. But then in this group, she said, so can you just put in your own words? That helps because blah, 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 blah. And that's the kind of thing I'm doing in September. I have a high school teacher on tape. So, and there's explicit debriefing at the end of the cooperative event of how it went with the skills. Sometimes it's self-assessment, sometimes it's me as teacher giving kids feedback on how they did with the skills. Now, I'm not going to ask you to share out now because we only have 57 minutes left. But I wanted you to just sort of that quick thing, experience the pressure of the structure for everybody to be able to not just participate, but be able to explain it. Because at random, I might have called on any one of you. And I theoretically called on 9 5s, even though I don't know who they are. But if we're actually processing content at the minute, I go around and I call on the 5s, and it's always to represent your table. It's not you're right, you're wrong. It's what did your table come up with. So I'm trying to build group identity. Here. And it is being reinforced by the actual structure of the academic text. So be aware there's a very rich literature on this if you haven't come across it yet. And if you did, and it was part of what you did in the 70s, have another look. How many of you, by the way, are elementary? And how many secondary? And I know we have a core, we have a, okay, and how many other? Because I'm wondering what's your role?
Right now I work in social ed law, but I'm not.
Now I'm going to move over to this column here, and I'm going to use some high school examples. Let's suppose we're starting at the top here. We're trying to build a climate in the room where mistakes are viewed as, like that sign, wrong, 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 right. You have to go through mistakes before you really learn it at a deep level. Here is a high school mathematics teacher, and this shows up, this desire to build that climate in your room shows up in language choice, in some regularly recurring events in the classroom. One of them is when a kid, you have kids working on things in 1s and 2s, individual reading time or individual problem solving, or kids in pairs, and the kid asks for help. Mr. Saphier, can you go over and help me, please? So that's no. What does a person say? What I'm saying here to you is there's no formula for that. There's a mindset that influences how you approach kids who ask for help or kids who have made errors. So what I'd like you to pay attention to is what do you hear in the language here of the teacher that could have anything to do with trying to build this belief in the normalness and validity and usefulness of errors.
I mean, I hope you guys realize that learning is messy, so can I be? It's okay to make some mistakes, there's nothing wrong with that, so let's see what we have. Now, I do have one issue in here, in number 12. What is the formula to find the axis of symmetry?
Alright, see, we can fix that.
You have to use that always. Why don't you write it down, Louis? If I was you, before I start looking for the axis of symmetry, write down the rule for that. How do we find the axis of symmetry? What's the rule we have to use? It's right here, number 1. Write it down. And look at number 12 and tell me what's wrong in number 12.
Easy.
Look at the axis of symmetry again. Read it out. X equals to minus b, negative b. Alright, if I was you when I'm doing, because if you don't have the right axis of symmetry, most likely the graph will be wrong. So use the axis of, write it down. Do it as practice. Before you start looking for it, just always write it down.
I'll stop there and just take a minute or two of table talk to revisit the language you heard and what of it might have anything to do with building this climate. Go.
Started with a mistake, you know, we're going to make mistakes, but then really encourage this problem-solving approach. The rules, show me what you do, what you've done here, put the rule down so you have this a plan to actually solve it.
You highlighted the show me what you do part too. Why did you start off with that?
Because I think it's really important. I think it's really important for the students to demonstrate their learning and the problem-solving steps that they went through, and might help guide them back to the original first step of looking at that equation, so they can go back through and find where their error was without having to point it out and independently guide their own learning.
So instead of saying, well, this is a mistake here, let me show you how to do that, he has them do the talk. Show me what you've done, show me what you did, show me where you're going, and then he goes to replace the plugin. And then he acts as a coach. He's given advice, and then he gets a little stronger with his advice. No, write it down. If I were you, he starts up and thinks, if I were you, and then it says, write it down. No, write it down. That's like a good coach. Who has something to add to that they picked up?
He was firm. He was not going to let them just be wimpy and not do it. Like it was, oh no, and he just stayed with them though and kept them on track. And I thought that was, you know, he wasn't super nice about it. And he kind of was, started off like a negative, I thought, pointing out the handwriting, but then, you know, so.
What I heard him say was learning is messy.
Yeah.
And then he went on to, I just like his attitude, he's very workmanlike. Let's just get this done.
Right.
Here's how you do it.
No, he made light of it, but he was firm. He was just, oh, well, it's kind of my way, but then he went, but that wasn't like his focus, and then he went from there. So he didn't like compliment sandwich them or anything. He just kind of just started working with them, and I thought it was really real. And
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Paul is also right that the first comment wasn't about handwriting. It's learning is messy. It's okay to be making mistakes. That's how you learn. And he's firm then, because they're not going to get off the hook. There is that combination of wrong, 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 right. And of course, that's the way it's going to go, and that's fine, and effort is what matters. And I'm going to hold you accountable for continuing to exert that effort. And you can run, but you can't hide. Now, there's a little bit more of that shows up in the next clip, and then I'm going to show you an interview of him. His name is Pierre. Pierre gets the kids who failed 8th grade math in 9th grade. And he gets them to meet the standards. He's the highest achieving math teacher in that high school. And it's a 4,200 student high school. It's the biggest high school in our state. So here's another little event from that same class.
That's the thing, open down and you look at the example. Alright, come on guys, let's pick up the pace, please.
1, plus 4 and plus 0.
Now we know it's going down, very good. So that will be 2
Yep.
for the axis of symmetry. Do you have negative 2? I'm looking at negative 2 here.
It's 2.
Alright, so you need to change that on that. Alright, so that's 2. Plug it in, very good. Do you have negative 4 or 4? Beautiful, but you need to show me how, that's the perfect, I'm impressed with that, but you need to show me how you get negative 4. Whenever you're doing substitution, you need to use parentheses. That's the right answer. But if I was in your shoe doing that, alright, I will do. You got the right answer, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just something I would like to share with you. That's negative 1 times, what's the value of x? 2 to the second power, plus 4 times 2, plus 3. Alright, so that will be 2 to the second power, which is 4. 4 times negative 1, it's negative 4. That's what it's like when I'm checking your work, that's what I'm looking for. Even if you got it wrong or right, it really doesn't matter to me, but I need to see that step. Alright? And if there was any mistake, if you do that step, I'm gonna be able to help you out. Alright, very good, very good. So let's finish that up. That's negative 4. That's 4 plus 2, that's 7. Very good. Why negative 7?
7.
It's 7, okay. Alright, negative 1.
Now, there's a different language in that one, but it's consistent with the theme, and I just want you to spend a minute or so doing the same thing. It's because it's in the language that we convey these embedded messages. You know, that there was one, George Lakehouse in 2000. He's on the West Coast. He's a student of embedded language, and he first made the press when he talked about the phrases that are used during presidential elections. And I remember the first little lesson that he shared publicly was that when George Bush was first running for office as W, George said that when elected he would provide tax relief. Now the word relief is one of those words with embedded meaning. It means relief comes when you're being oppressed by something, whether it be pain or something else. So it carries with it a sort of unspoken and unaware cycle of, well, that's tax relief, when what he meant was tax cuts for the rich. So there are embedded meanings that kids get out of phrases that we use, like the one that we looked at today where she says, have you been successful yet? Meaning, have you finished all of the steps in constructing your pictograph in a 2nd grade class that I looked at with some other teachers here earlier in the day. The word yet has an embedded meaning, which is what? Right. Assumed. So there's a lot that has to do with the study of language and embedded meanings when we're doing classroom climate building. So did you hear any embedded meanings in any that you want to hear it again? Because I've talked so long now you can't remember what he said. Okay. I'll let you listen to it again because I did blather on too long. Let's go back and just listen to this. And I'm asking you to find something with embedded meaning in it. There we go, flip two.
Now let me look at the example. Alright, come on guys, let's pick up the pace, please.
1, and 6 seconds. Plus 4 and plus 0.
Now we know it's going down. Very good. So that will be 2
Yep.
for the axis of symmetry. Do you have negative 2? I'm looking at negative 2 here.
2.
Alright, so you need to change that on that. Alright, so that's 2. Plug it in. Very good. Do you have negative 4 or 4? Beautiful, but you need to show me how. That's the perfect. I'm impressed with that. But you need to show me how you get negative 4. Whenever you're doing substitution, you need to use parentheses. That's the right answer. But if I was in your shoe doing that, alright, I will do. You got the right answer. There's nothing wrong with that, but this is something I would like to share with you. That's negative 1 times, what's the value of x? 2 to the second power, plus 4 times 2, plus 3. Alright, so that will be 2 to the second power, which is 4. 4 times negative 1, it's negative 4. That's what it's like when I'm checking your work, that's what I'm looking for. Even if you got it wrong or right, it really doesn't matter to me, but I need to see that step. Alright? And if there's any mistake, if you do that step, I'm gonna be able to help you out. Alright, very good, very good. So let's finish that up. That's negative 4. That's 4 plus 2, that's 7. Very good. Why negative 7?
7.
It's 7, okay. Alright, negative 1. Plug it in. Alright, that will be negative 1, negative 4, negative 3, plus 2. Check that again. When you do the substitution, show the work for the negative.
Okay. Take a couple of minutes at most now. Any language there that has embedded messages about who you are to me, whether you're capable or not. Go. Anybody can start out. What's one little piece you discussed there? Just yell it out.
I will help you.
Yes. If mistakes are right, I don't care if you get it right or wrong, I'll help you. There are declarations of that punctuated throughout most every day of every class, and after a while, they believe it.
Because he does.
What else?
I'm impressed with that.
Yeah, right. I'm impressed with that. But
But you need to show me.
you need to show me.
And if I were you, I mean, I like how he puts it on, you know, if I were you, and they see him and they clearly respect him and they trust him. And so if he's saying, I'd do it like that, they're like, oh, you know, that might get it.
Yeah. It's kind of like an advisor instead of a boss. If I were you, here's what I would do. Anything else?
The way he says you can, or at least has that connection. When he first goes over and he says, you can do it this way, he goes, but let me show you something.
Yes.
And then he says, you can do it this way. It's almost, that's the embedded part where it's almost saying, it's all the pressure on the student. At that point, you can see that where it's, because the area is just a little, it's, okay, I got it right. And now you can learn something new, that's the embedded part.
Check.
And
Now-
it also gives the student gets the relief of the teacher saying, you have it right, this is good, the rest of the class hears that, and so he doesn't have anything at stake in front of anybody else.
Kids are always watching us, and in a situation like that, when you talk to two students, everybody hears you. So there is patterning and modeling and messages to everybody else from that. Yes, ma'am.
Right at the beginning, he said, you can change that. You know, it's not right, change it. Let's go from there.
Check. And the matter-of-fact way in which you just model that is how you said it too. That's part of the flow. Right on. All right, we're going to stay in that middle column. We're going to go down one notch to where it says, here perseverance and craftsmanship are what count, rather than speed. Now, I would propose, and you can disagree with me, that message is embedded in the following incident. This one happens again to be a mathematics class, and kids are working in groups. their job is to translate a verbal sentence into a mathematical equation or mathematical sentence. And it's not a word problem. Well, it sort of is a word problem, but it's one where the kids are first trying to understand the relationship of symbols and algebraic expressions to realize situations. So they have to write an equation that says something like 30 less than 3 times a number is 40. 30 less than 3 times a number is 40. Okay, in your groups, ladies and gentlemen, come up with the equation and be prepared for everybody to explain it. So at one point he's going to go up to a girl and says, and they seem to have the right answer as a group. So he's going to ask one girl, why is it 3n minus 30? Is it 3n minus 30 or 30 minus 3n? Can you explain why you came up with the version that you did? If I don't do something on actually unpacking the content here, there's a few people in this room who will be trying to figure out the problem the whole next week. Pay attention to the video. So, 30 less than 3 times a number. How do you translate that into algebra? 3n minus 30. It's less than 3 times the number. So 3 times the number less than 30 equals the other thing, and that's what they're supposed to say. So it's supposed to be 3n minus 30, not 30 minus 3n, but when I say you explain why it's not 30 minus 3n, you have to have understood the mathematics of the sentence in order to explain it. So he goes up to Kaylin, and he asks her, and well, you'll see what happens. Now he's going around to various groups. He's not with those kids. He's leaving those groups and he's walking across the classroom. And I didn't know this nice thing was going to happen, so I didn't get over there so you could see them right away. But Kaylin is the girl that we're paying attention to when he gets over there.
Are you ready? Yeah. Cool.
Are you ready? Cool. Now that means that, like the thing that we did here, they know he's going to call on somebody to represent the group.
I just want to say before we start, there's a lot of groups stuck on this. There's a lot of groups stuck on this.
Can you hear him? There's a lot of groups stuck on this. What's the point of saying that? And acknowledging difficulty. As opposed to saying, before you set kids loose on a problem, when they appear worried, oh, don't worry about it, that's easy. I hate to think how many times I've said that. For this sort of empathetic motivation, it's no win statement, right? If I say it's easy and it turns out to be easy, no triumph, he said it was easy anyway. If I say it's easy and it's not easy for you, then what? What conclusion must you reach?
Not easy. That's what I'm getting into because it's not easy. Okay, do it.
Okay, so what's your question?
Why are you doing 3n minus 30?
Because they cancel out.
No, I'm not saying why you should try 30. I'm talking about the setup. The 3n minus 30. Why are you doing 3n minus 30 instead of 30 minus 3n?
Because I can't explain this. Can you like just call her, please?
I'm confident you can get it.
No, I
I'm
can't.
confident you can get it. I've seen you get problems at this before. I've seen you do problems at this before, and I can do it. So, but what we haven't seen yet is you guys explain in a way that we can make sure that everyone gets it. So that's the tough part. It's not just understanding it, but helping other people see it. Because this is difficult. Okay, well, so maybe before calling me over next time, why don't we do some practice? Some practice? So maybe you just get nervous. Are you just getting nervous? Okay. I understand. But why don't you just take a minute, think about what you want to say. If that's right now, I'll listen. If it's now, I'll come back. Do you want me to come back? Just take a minute, do a few practice times. The question I'm going to ask you is, why are you doing 3n minus 30 instead of 30 minus 3n? That's the question. So I would give a few explanations, listen to the three of them, you three listen and see if you want to give any feedback.
Okay, why would you do that?
Now, in a few minutes, I'll show you what happens 5 minutes later when he comes back to that group. But right now, I want you to examine the significance of that event. What's going on there that has some purchase on her future as a student on why the achievement in this class is pretty high. Talk about that at your tables. Now, the language in this one is not so embedded, it's pretty direct. What were some of the phrases that struck you? Just yell it out.
I've seen you do work like this before.
Right.
I know you can do it.
I know you can do it. Right out there. I know you can do it. Direct expression of confidence. You know, if you think back to teachers in your past who had high expectations for you and your students, it could be first grade, it could be college. There's some way in which a large percentage of the best teachers identified with you our academic career students would have a person who said that to us, either directly or indirectly. I know you can do it. Sometimes it's conveyed simply by persistence, but sometimes in very direct language. Sometimes indirect language. It can be something. I haven't thought of this for years. When I went to college in my freshman year, I wasn't doing very well in a whole lot of subjects, and somehow in political science, I had this esteemed, nationally known professor, and the very first paper I wrote about a book called Street Corner Society was, he gave me an A on it, and he, all kinds of comments about why. Well, the second paper I wrote, I got a C, but his comment was, Mr. Saphier, this isn't up to your usual standard. What do you know about my usual standard? But nevertheless, I worked my butt off the rest of the year to try and meet what I conceived his image of my capacity to be. That was the embedded message of Mr. Saphier. This isn't up to your usual standard. You are better than that. Okay, what else? What else did you lift out of what he said besides those two direct remarks? Say again.
He totally won't let her off.
He won't let her off. Now, isn't that something? Like, she's looking so embarrassed, she covers her face with a cloth for a moment, and then finally she says, well, no, I can't. Won't you just call on her? Now, how easy it would be to try and use upholstered language to soften it, but in fact, you go away from her and to say, would you like to help her out and answer it? Yes.
I think it's really important to assess the culture in the room before you're putting a student on the spot like that also, because you can set a student up in a group like that. If that culture and that risk-taking isn't there yet, to really shut down a kid.
That's right, you can. So there is a whole history here of what he's done with that class in order to make them feel responsible for each other and not to laugh at anybody. It is absolutely taboo to laugh at a student's mistake in here. Now, he's doing some things like Pierre did from day one in order to build this climate of mistakes are normal. But there is a woven texture behind this. Nevertheless, I want us to linger a moment on this point of students feeling stuck or embarrassed in view of other students. The felt need is to not make the kid feel embarrassed, and it often leads us to take the spotlight off them prematurely. I'm going to acknowledge everything you said about building the climate, but to allow struggle and then scaffold it so that the kid can be successful is the nature of the job in classroom climate building, and it is not easy, but it is very important for low-performing students like her. You know, she's a kid who's always done poorly in math, and she thinks she hasn't got the math gene. And I don't know if it's true for her, but it is for other kids. And maybe her father told her, oh, it's all right, kid, and I wasn't good at math either. Nobody in our family is. And to that, one must respond when she says that to me, Mr. Saphier, nobody in my family is good at math. You can't expect much. My father wasn't either, and my response has to be, he would have been if he had me for a teacher, and you will be too. Let's sit down and figure out where the gaps are. It's not that your brain is defective or your genetic system. It's that there are gaps, and I'm here to fill them in, and you have an able brain and can get it. Now, it's not as if now magically Kaylin is confident. Look what happens 5 minutes later. it's good what happens, but she's still on, you know, in this tenuous state of, don't call on me, please.
And losing
I just want to say,
weight and
and
weight and
No, we didn't get the mic over quick enough. What he just said is he sits down with Palin's group is, I just want to say, I'm proud of you guys for sticking with this one. He doesn't mean Palin isn't one, it's the problem.
that's right. What is that? Okay, is 30 less than the number? And is 30 less than what? And what is triple the number? Well, how do we represent that in your equation? 3n. So we got the 3n. Is 30 less than that? So we take the 3n, we subtract 30 from it. Cool. So good work. Way to be patient with each other.
Now, if I stop the tape right then, you say, okay, she's on top of it, but what's the next you say?
Way to congratulate each other.
You explain that again.
And several groups were stuck on that, and what I'm proud of you guys is that you kept trying to explain it, because it's tough to do. It's super tough to do. All right, I'm going to give you guys number 3. So keep it up. Keep that up.
This is end of October. This is October. That was 2010. It's October of the year. You know, she does very well finally, but this is those first couple of months when you're trying to get the low confidence kids to exert the effort and to stick with it. So you know, she's not crying, she's laughing, and she has her face covered because the cameras, you know. All right, so that's it. So it is also significant that cooperative structures are embedded in this class. And that he has already set it up so that they feel that it's their job to have roles and be mutually responsible. The more low-performing kids you have, the more you need that, because there's just so many kids I can get to in a period. You need to multiply your effect through the other kids. Okay. Any other comments or questions about that? Now we're kind of like down to the second notch of building this climate of effort-based ability. The bottom one on the middle column there is the penultimate place to get, and it takes a long time to get the history that most kids have had at school. But it's to get them to believe everybody is capable of achievement, not just those who are fast. And it means putting an end to the hold that the bell curve has on our belief about the nature of intellect, or the nature of ability. This is a very challenging notion in the course I'm doing for principals and the one that for teacher leaders. We're going to spend a whole day and a half on it. And I mentioned in a session where a few of you were present today that I spent the first 40 years of my life believing that it's true. You know, the bell curve. If you think about the bell curve, you know how it goes. There's a little narrow slice down here, and then it goes up, and then it goes down like that. And at the very high end of the numerical IQ curve, or the intelligence measurement, or the ability measurement, a friend of mine, Jeff Howard, said, these are the kids who we think are VSs, which stands for very smart. And in the middle are the kids who are SSs, which would be sort of smart. And then at the bottom are the kids who are KDs, which is kind of dumb. And that's the nature of the world. That's the way it is. That's, it's not their fault. It's just the way it is. Ability, especially intellectual ability to do school kind of work, is fixed. Whatever you got when you came out of the womb is how much you're going to get. It is unchangeable. Nothing can alter that. And it is deterministic of how you do in life. It is, in fact, an entity, a thing, that comes with the package. And even though it is fixed and deterministic, fortunately we can measure it, so we can create the appropriate academic environment for kids of different abilities. And I'm going to make the case to as many audiences as I can with evidence during this year that that is incorrect, that that is wrong, flat out wrong, even though I believed it for most of my years. I believed it because I grew up in America. This country has the strongest belief in the bell curve of any country on earth. We're certainly not the only country that believes it, but it is stronger here than anywhere, and I have now documented that. And you've heard the stories of how opposite the belief is in Japan, China, Singapore, where I often go over for their educators. Japan, they call it gambate. They really do believe that effort is the dominant influence on how a person does. It's present, I mean, our view is present in lots of Western countries here, but nowhere near as strong as here. A man named Adam Urbanski, who is still really decades into this. He's the president of the Teachers Union of Rochester, New York. But he didn't come to this country until he was 18 years old. And he was born in Poland. And he told me once on a car ride, you know, when I got here, I was shocked at how much Americans believed in innate ability. That's not the way it is in Poland, where they believe that, you know, it has something to do maybe with the alacrity with which people pick up ideas or, you know, dispositions to learn certain things faster. But the main thing is how much effort you put out. Now I'm saying this to an audience of Americans who have grown up like me, inhaling the bell curve. You inhale it, you know. For me, it was at the dinner table, and the conversation about the abilities of the people in the family always reflected the unstated assumption that it was innate. And it comes out in stories like Uncle Don, who always got A's, but he never had to take a book home. He was so smart. And the other members of the family, Aunt Muriel, she did this, Uncle Vic did, well, yeah, Uncle Vic got A's too. He had to work so hard. Here we are. So, I certainly can't do anything to convince anybody tonight about this, except to point out a few little contrary facts that are kind of stimulating. One of them is that all of your students learn to speak. They learn the language by the age of 2 or 3. And when you think of the logic task it takes to learn how to speak, it is awesome. Children learn words by continually comparing positive and negative exemplars of the word. I remember seeing this with some of my own kids. I have 4 kids. So there was a time when they thought that anything with 4 wheels was a truck. You know, one of the first words that my twin boys learned, truck, and then a little car goes by, and Graham says, truck. It's not. No, that's a car, honey. That's an automobile. But it has, now he doesn't say to me, but it has 4 wheels. But he starts comparing the 2 things. You know, another friend of mine had anything on 4 legs is a dog. And then we go to the zoo and he sees a giraffe and he says, dog. Well, no, that's a giraffe. And so the positive and negative exemplars get sorted out, nouns get defined, and it's an intensely intellectually demanding logical process that our kids are capable of doing. And they learn thousands and thousands of words by the age of 3 and 4. So it's very hard to demonstrate that there's not a fairly refined level of intellectual ability in most humans unless there's organic brain damage or something like that. So anyway, I'm going to come back to this. Well, maybe even, I'm just going to take that notion of effort-based ability and how you convince kids, it's called attribution. That effort is the thing that matters most at a later session that we'll have. Not the next one, but probably the one after that. And it's a major area of teacher skill to get kids to believe that effort would matter most. Look how different, however, that kind of skill is from explaining something, or from setting up classroom routines, or from responding to discipline problems, or planning a set of activities that will get them to understand what photosynthesis really is instead of just spouting the words. Chlorophyll, sunlight, carbon dioxide. Oh, you really do understand photosynthesis. You just remember the word. The levels of different things that comprise teaching skill are unparalleled in the work world. absolutely unparalleled. You know, in surveys, interview studies, and ratings of the complexity of various professions, especially the perceptual demand of perception, teaching ranks second. Second only to, guess what? Perceptual demand. Air traffic control. And to tell you the truth, it ain't that much different. Somebody were to follow you around today and look at the various decisions you're making. All right, let us move now to the third column, which is influence and control. In the early 80s, long before I was doing writing about it, doing courses for people on classroom climate, Charlotte Thompson, who was a high school biology teacher, was in a course with me on the cognitive stuff. And so, we, as a group, we had done dipsticking. Dipsticking is a term Madeline Hunter invented to cover the topic of checking for understanding broadly across the whole class at once. So you get a reading from everybody about whether they understand something or not, you know. And there are many ways that people do that today. Like every kid has a little whiteboard in your high school class, and you ask a quick question, everybody pencils the answer, say, okay, ready everybody? 1, 2, 3, shoot. And so you see all our answers simultaneously. And if you want to make it a little less public, you say, just put it on your chest, so nobody can see it but me. So you're getting, with a one-question quiz, you're getting answers from every kid simultaneously. That's dipstick. Now, Charlotte had taught her kids the Madeline Hunter early version of it, which is a hand signal. Thumbs up if you understand, thumbs down if you don't, and thumbs in the middle if you sort of do. Right. Or you could use the finger rating. 5, I got it, 1, I don't, 3, I'm sort of. Now, so Charlotte was using that with her class, and she was a real kind of like instinctive classroom climate builder. After a while, they started sending her the thumb signal even when she didn't ask for it. What they meant was, I didn't get that, stop. They felt empowered to have a voice. And as soon as that happened, she stopped the class, complimented the kid who did it, and said, I want you all to do that. I want you to let me know when I'm going too fast or when something I'm presenting doesn't make sense. Stop my teaching, slow me down, get me to do whatever I need to do so you can get it. Please, take that initiative, take that control. So when she authorized it, she took what one kid who was kind of fooling around but also really telling her he didn't get it, to become a norm of the culture in the classroom. So when you're somebody who's trying to build this sense of legitimate, I mean, I'm not giving a class out when kids take over. I'm just saying, I want to hear your voice when it will help our learning. And it means invent simple devices like that, where the kids can let you know you need to slow down or do something over again or do it in a different way. You know, in the kindergarten, even if you just tug on my pants, or tug on my skirt, whatever it is. So that's the first letter. Now, the second one, I was in this particular high school a lot that year. It was Newton North High School. This one came from Dick Thornton, who was a housemaster, but he also taught English. I had done a little focus instructional point on something called Guess What's on the Teacher's Mind. We were looking at questioning strategies, and I was saying to the group, all high school teachers, sometimes we ask a question for which we have one answer in mind, except that there's a whole bunch of potential answers given the way we asked it. And that's called Guess What's on the Teacher's Mind, because there's only one answer you want, but there's a whole bunch that's impossible given what you said. I'm going to repeat myself now with that case story. The example that I used was when, from another part of this study of clarity, a teacher was trying to give kids a mnemonic device to remember the meaning of the word concave. And what he intended in his mind was that the kids would picture themselves in front of a physical cave. And when you're in front of a cave, the dark space sort of bellies away from you, and that was supposed to be a visual mnemonic for concave. But what he actually said to the class was, okay, so ladies and gentlemen, where do bears live? And the first kid said, in the woods. And he said, yeah. Anybody else? And then the next kid says, in zoos. And he says, yeah. And you keep going on like this, and another one says, in hollow trees. Yeah. And then finally a kid says cave, and he says, yes. Now that'll help you remember what the word concave means. And then he moved on to that. When I originally put that in the book, it was an example of inexplicit cueing, because what his intention was good, but he left out the little part of, imagine you're standing in front of it and the space belly is away. He had that in his head, he didn't say it. It was inexplicit. However, what set the whole thing up was a guada. But guess what's on the teacher's mind question? Where there's only one answer, but the question itself exposes a universe of possibilities. Guada. So, you know, I had done that in the class. So Dick goes into his class and he said, you know, this course I'm in with this guy named Saphier, who was talking about this, guess what the teacher's mind thing. And you know, it's like this, and he gave me an example. He said, I never do anything like that, do I? And the kids all in unison went. And he was, you know, flabbergasted. Really? He says. Now, this is why I give the guy credit. Because immediately, he was entering into this sort of community control thing. Well, look, I don't want to be doing that. We got to come up with something. We have to come up with something so that if I do that, you can let me know and somehow influence the situation. So if I ask a question and you can't answer it, and then I ask another kid and the kid can't answer it, it must have been a bad question. So first of all, if I ask a Guatem, and put that on G-W-O, first of all, if I ask a Guatem, say Guatem. And then second of all, if I ask one and you just can't answer it, so he was inventing an early version of what we call the lifeline. If you can't get it, then you call on somebody else. And if that person can't get it, they call on somebody else. And if we get to the third kid and somebody can get it, then I'm going to take responsibility for either not having asked a good question or not having given you adequate prior knowledge. So he was entering into this business of negotiating the rules of the classroom game. A lot of the classroom game has to do with question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. Now this was 1983. 35 years later, we know that what we should do is set it up according to the idea called making students thinking visible, in which I don't get trapped in, see, I didn't know enough at the time to advise him, and it didn't occur to him that the whole cycle of question, answer, question, answer, question, answer, question, answer is defeating of a classroom climate where a community of discourse is created. And the making students thinking visible thing that I introduced at the Hilton Hotel, we had that big session, results in question, answer, 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 or like teacher, student, 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 student. That happens when you bring those skills to life. So anyway, there was Dick going through that. Now, there are other things that happen when you're trying to develop this sense of influence and control. And I'm going to show you a clip now of a high school foreign language teacher who has taken on the notion of getting the kids to have responsibility for their own learning through self-assessment and goal setting. So we're down here, and it's somewhere in these bottom two things here. The next time I revise this, at the fourth level, I'm going to put student self-assessment according to the criteria I'll follow, what you did today, and goal setting. So this guy at the end of this was last year I made this clip, and he teaches Japanese, foreign language teacher in Urban High School, and he's been doing it for 15 years, and he got better achievement than ever before, and it was mainly because of the things that you're about to see. Now they are captured here in the top part of this chart. He's instituting in his class this circle of activities that starts with frequent quizzes every week, followed by student scoring and all the things that go around here. So I'm going to let you see this clip, and maybe we'll end in 2 minutes after 6. But I'm giving this because I want you to think about what the potential power could be of giving the kids more ownership of self-assessment and then self-correcting. And then what scaffolding can you take so that they can actually do it? So here is Michael. I'll show you.
Words and with some degree of explicitness, what did they do before, between leaving class yesterday and coming today? And they need to be specific. I gave some.
They have to write down on a piece of paper what they did between yesterday and coming to class today to get ready for today. In other words, what did you do to study?
Was in the classroom about, just don't say studied, that means nothing to you or to me. Be as detailed as possible. And without the examples, that's the answers you would get. So I just threw several ideas out there. I'm going to sort through them and make sure I kind of pick out ones that I think do get to that point and share those with the students. The second question is more for that, what did we get out of class today? It's really, that one is a lot for me. It's for the students too. When your parents ask me, what did you do in school today? What did you learn in school today? Well, what did you learn in my class today? To know if the targets you want them to get out of were coming through that class. And the last one is, before they leave class, they answer question 2, what did you get out of class today? And then what's your plan for tomorrow? Meaning, do you have an idea of where your learning target is for next week? Because we do weekly assessments that are quizzes like this. And
Every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday,
right.
Very formalized. If they get into the routine of metacognitively thinking about their study on a daily basis and putting it onto paper, that becomes an internalized self-reflection that I can then not maybe require all students. Maybe it's the kind of thing, okay, you've shown great proficiency over the semester. I don't need that piece of paper from you now. Every day. If you're struggling, let's still work on this because there's something that's not really working. The point is to teach them the importance of the daily study and that it has a target. And it's not just, I studied, because I don't know what that means, and they don't either.
No, but they know it's a word that usually makes a teacher happy.
Right, exactly, because we don't actually often dig deeper into what it means to study. And you say, well, I used Quizlet. Quizlet's a fantastic resource, but there's so many facets to this online resource of Quizlet. They're glorified flashcards. There's games that go with it and stuff. And we even mentioned this in the classroom. I did Scatter. Well, Scatter is about matching 2 things. That would help you with one of the 2 skills on that assessment, but not the writing skill. Because matching isn't going to be tested when you have to write. You have to know the sounds and be able to produce them. So sometimes they have a misalignment of their study with what they need to actually accomplish.
Here is a moment in a class early in the year when Mr. Van Craig is introducing this 3-question reflection to his class for the first time.
So we're going to start, actually the class is a little bit different than we have done in the past, but it's going to become part of the routine for the foreseeable future. Just because as the assessments, and this assessment was a lot more tricky than the last several, right? In many ways, maybe you don't think so. Maybe you think, oh, that's completely fine, and that's great. But if you're feeling like, hold it, this is really hard all of a sudden, this is going to help you start thinking about what you're doing in preparation for assessments, and it's become kind of a daily log thing. It asks you 3 questions. The way this works is it can be a communication point between you and me, so that I have an opportunity to understand what you are doing to prepare for these assessments. Not just the assessments though either, it's just the general idea of the learning of the language that we're talking about here. The grades at the end of the day don't really matter, okay? What matters is you're learning the Japanese. The Japanese is what you're graded on, right? You know your grade consists of tests and little assessments, quizzes, and a small percentage of your binder. It's like 80% performance. You've got to know the language, right? So ultimately, you really can't do poorly in the class if you do the assessments and keep up on them, because you're getting 80s or higher on every assessment. You likely will then do well on the big tests, and you come out with a good grade and Japanese. So it's a win-win thing, right? But this process right here is going to be using your mailboxes over here, that you fold it in half the long way. You don't need to crease it. And when you come in, you would grab this from here, because they're going to sit here. Okay, you grab it from here, and you go back to your spot, and you answer question number 1, which will always be the same question. What did you accomplish since leaving our last class together? So we left the language lab yesterday. What do you feel you accomplished from that time of leaving class to this point now, i.e., what did you do for your study? On that, don't just put, I studied. Because to me, that means not really anything. Because to me, study can mean you looked at a worksheet for 15 minutes. That's the most passive form of study you could do, right? That doesn't mean all of a sudden it magically worked its way into your brain and now you can produce it, right? So be more specific. If you use things like Quizlet, what part of Quizlet did you use? Just so.
Now, the rest of the tape has a number of nice little vignettes. One of them is that week he has them sit in a circle and read what they wrote to each other and have them coach or ask questions of each other about their study strategy. So he's explicitly teaching them through these interactions what effective ways to study are. And the last thing I want to show you is an interview we did of some of this. These are tenacity moments. Kids who are not filling in their sheets or not doing things, and we kind of like chasing them down and making them come in the next day, and this kid doesn't, and then you see a little interaction the next day after that. These clips are all on our website. You can look at the whole thing if you want. Now, one of the practices he has is controversial in a lot of high schools, and that is to say, not only does he allow retakes of quizzes, he insists on it if they don't get 80. They have to, and they have to keep taking it until they get 80. So what do his kids think of that? That's this. Students' reaction to this cycle of quizzes, self-scoring, plan making, and doing retakes is clear.
I think that the retake, or the assessments and everything, it's not just for a grade, like it's to see how well you're doing, so if you can like go over everything or like help on a particular set and like help what you're doing if you don't have like something down, like like the tests, like they're not really for grades. It's
like a checkup with your doctor.
Yeah, it's more like a checkup. Like how are you doing? Like you're not doing bad. Or what?
Yeah, I think like some teachers, you'll go along in class and all of a sudden a big test comes out of nowhere. But the big tests that we take, they're made up of all the little assessments that we do. And that, like on the classroom expectation sheet we got in the beginning of class, in the beginning of the semester, it didn't say like if you don't master a quiz, you can retake it. It said that you shouldn't, or you have to retake it. That's the policy. And if that wasn't a policy, many people would just forget about it and lay it off. And then they would do bad on the test because you're not doing good on the little assessments. But now with the policy that you have to retake it, that makes sure that you're going to assess yourself and you're going to be doing better on the big